doo doop, doo doop, snoop, doo doop, doo doop, snoop, doo doop, doo doop, snoop, doo doop. Doo doop, snoop, doo doop, snoop, doo doop, doo doop, snoop, doo doop, doo doop, snoop, doo doop, doo doop, doo doop.
Hey! we got it, chat. What about this? Very good improvisation, Joe. Welcome to one more scuffed episode of Tactical Crouch, where the adults are all gone. We have to make up our own intros on the spot, and we really don't have a host. I suppose this is a time where we ask the guest how they're doing. How's it going, ChrisTFer?
That was far better than I was expecting. Actually, I must admit, that was a pretty good intro. I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good. Like all things considered, without dads around, it's about as good as we can expect.
The kids have truly been left with the car keys.
Now, of course, we also got to do some housekeeping. Our show is supported by Patreon, and I think the URL is at patreon.com/tacticalcrouch. Probably also Googleable. Follow us on Twitter at tacticalcrouch. Tweet us your questions and topics you'd like to discuss on the show. Sometimes we actually take some of those, or at least it will function as inspiration. Show records live on Wednesdays at, well, right around this time. So
right
like,
around this time.
So 9 p.m. CET, and that would be what? Like that's noon.
3 p.m. EST and noon PST.
Very good, very good. You can watch and listen anywhere where podcasts can be heard, as well as YouTube. Yeah, we actually renamed the channel a while ago, right? Like, so Tactical Crouch is something you should also be able to Google. You will need a lot of help to find this episode, so
Gonna be buried.
It's going to be
only.
buried, but that just
OnlyFans
increases
exclusive.
increases the value of this episode, and that's why we can drop extra juice. Actually, I don't have any extra juice, but I also know that just one more Patreon producer has renamed, but I, for the life of me, cannot find the rename. So I apologize, Fraud, for your rename, because I can't remember it. And I'm not going to attempt to get them all right in one row unless Joe wants to try.
Oh, come on. Give it here. All right, ready?
Yeah.
Our show, I won't say news because there's really not a ton of news, is brought to you by Battle Crab Pin, Lulshin, Charlie L, Audio Compass, Pork Chop Sammy, Kasha 67, Kuchi Kopi, Chara, Nathan Your Misery, Hunter Train, Refined Bean, Rex Sane, Roger B, Fabled Steven, Owen, Chris R 34444. Yiska's holding me hostage. Please send help. I'm under Yiska's desk. Please send help. Yiska says Fisher, 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 Fish, Fish, and then Fradinho, who has his name changed.
Right. Very good. Very good. That was with one breath as well.
It was.
I actually,
it was
like,
tailing off.
apparently there's some breathing technique that people can do to instantly like hold their breath for 4.5 minutes. Maybe we should teach that to John.
Maybe.
Just like it has something to do with the breathing technique. I'm not even sure if that's scientific or just hocus pocus, because David Blaine literally said that. So
oh, is that how he did like the weird Times Square, like hold his breath underwater for like 2 days?
Not 2 days.
Singers have to learn how to do it or something, right? So they can like sing long notes and long bits without having to breathe. There's something they do as well. Maybe it's the same thing.
Yeah. Anyway, we actually haven't done our review of the matches, so we got a lot to talk about. Not just like the matches that are going to come up, but as well, but also a bunch of like topics that just surfaced during the week, and we also get to talk about some of the past matches. We probably won't make it through all of them. Of course, with ChrisTFer here, we kind of want to keep it relevant on topic. And I suppose a good point to start this at, what would you say, Joe? Do we directly want to jump into the games for this?
I think let's kind of take shock in general, the good, the bad, the tweets, how the players are feeling afterwards. I think just talking about the general feeling after the shock game, which I feel like is a pretty big win for you guys. How's the team feel after the win, or maybe even just talking about the game first. Wherever Yiska kind of wants to take it, I'm on board.
Right. Yeah. So, are you guys actually? Have you beaten the shock for the first time? Was that your first time?
I was doing. I'm like obsessed with like the records and the history of the team. So like when we went on we were on like a 12 map win streak. I knew that like before the stats guys did it and stuff because I'm always like trying to see where we are. And I think from what I understand is the Fusion beat the shock in like stage 1 or 2 season 1 when they had like their original bad roster almost before Krusty, and they got all of those guys. But I think they also lost at the end of season 1 to shock, and then I think we got beat quite regularly in season 2, and then obviously twice again this season. So at least the current iteration of shock, that was the first time we've beaten them, I'm pretty sure.
And that victory wasn't just like the average one, right? Like usually it gets pretty close between you guys. This one, at least in score, wasn't. Did it feel close? Did it feel stressful?
No, it was kind of weird, especially after the finals we'd had the week before. It's almost like you see them as like this, I don't know, anime like final boss, and you expect whenever you finally beat them, it's going to be in like some 4-3, like extremely hyped up game back and forth. And then we kind of just freeed them. I think we kind of realized pretty early on that we were going to be okay in the series. And then there wasn't like huge celebration. We weren't popping champagne or anything afterwards because it was almost a little bit anticlimactic, as bad as that sounds.
Really? So you didn't feel like a huge burden finally off your shoulder?
It was a huge achievement. Like it's important, and we knew it was important for a lot of reasons. But I think that just the nature of like a Frio kind of not super close game it's not as exciting as it would have been had we like managed like to win 4-3 in the tournament or something,
Yeah, of course.
Because it's probably only like 45 minutes of game time in total, so you're in and out pretty quick in a 3-0.
Yeah. Why do you think it was so one-sided, relatively?
I don't know. It's a good question. I think the one thing I can say this season about us is maybe the thing that I'm most happy and proud about is that, like, if you want to beat Diffusion this year, you have to be the best form of yourselves to stand a chance, Like, if you look through all of our losses, I think the first one to Paris and, like, where we lost in that literally 99-1-1 overtime last fight, okay, I think we were bad then, but that was the first week of Hero Pools, so we were in chaos. We had no idea what was going on. And I think Paris were probably in a similar boat. But then if you just go through every other loss after then, I think we lost to Mayhem in the first tournament, which was probably the best Mayhem I've ever looked all season, was that patch. Then, okay, we lose to Shock again in, like, Widow, Tracer, Bap Zen meta, which is probably the best they've been all season. Then we regroup, and then we get to the final against Paris, and we probably lose to them in what was their best performance in their best meta in that the Genji Orisa meta. And then again, we lose to Shock when they were pretty good. So almost all of our losses, teams had to really, really beat us. And none of those games, except for that one Shock game, were one-sided, So it's like, that's the one thing everyone needs to know when they play against the Fusion is if you want to beat us, you have to be 100%. And then even if you're 80%, 70%, even if you're Shock, if you're not there, we'll free you, we'll run you over. So yeah, I guess that's how our season's gone in a lot of ways.
How important do you think this one was for them? I mean, obviously this kind of clinched for you the first place for this season, so that's a big one. Just like from a bracket point of view, that's not a bad advantage to have. But also, how do you assess that from a mental point of view?
I think it's huge, actually. Like you said, the first seed, technically it meant it was more important than the tournaments, because if we'd won the tournament and lost that game, we wouldn't have got first. But when I like super it, like we don't care about that, but I think it's really important for our mental that we know that when we play Shock that we can beat them. And it's really important that Shock know when they play us, they can lose to us, because we have it with certain teams where we almost feel like a little bit invincible against them. Like there's a few teams in the league where we have like 5-0 records against. I know Atlanta, we've played them 5 times, we've won every time. I think Toronto were in a similar position. So when we come across those teams, we know that our mentality is we know we can win, and they probably know that they can't win, or they know it's going to be really difficult. So scratching that itch and getting that out of Shock's head and getting that out of our heads is probably pretty important.
Yeah.
I'd be kind of remiss if I didn't kind of pick your brain on the Temple of Anubis differences. Both, or most teams within this last week had like 2 kind of different trains of thought, where there were certain teams that were like very stuck on double shield, whether if it was Ryan Sigma kind of brawly stuff or the traditional kind of Arisa Sigma stuff.
Yeah.
You guys opted for a dive kind of tank line going into both defending and attacking Temple of Anubis, whereas like Shock kind of was still dabbling with the double shield. Could you kind of talk a little bit about why you guys decided to go with Winston?
Yeah, so for a Shock week, we kind of realized we have to prepare a little bit differently than we would if it's against probably any other team in the league. And then also tournaments, you kind of can't afford to be specific. But like as coaches, we asked ourselves a lot of questions during the week, like what gives us the best chance against Shock? Like if it with our map pool, it was like Lijiang, Kings Row, Anubis, Havana. In theory, we could have either played the Rhine comps or the Orisa Sigma comps against most teams, and that was probably optimal. But we felt specifically against ANS and just against Shock in general that we kind of didn't want to just allow them to be too free. So we thought that dive was one of the comps where we probably have the best advantage if they choose to mirror. And considering we were one of the only teams playing dive in America, it probably meant that Shock didn't really get good practice against dive during the week. Okay. And then we're in a situation where a lot of our practice was against these Orisa Sigma comps.
Gotcha.
So for sure, our week was more productive in terms of like scrim opponents and quality. And we just feel really good on dive, to be honest. Like, even if it like obviously when we originally saw like Briggs, Zarya, Genji Tracer banned, you think it's going to be hard to make dive work. But as long as Winston and Sombra are open, I think that there's ways to do it, and that's kind of that was where our strategy went, and I guess it worked.
Oh, certainly did. I think you kind of hinted at On's kind of going back to King's Row and looking at their first point attack. They look to be kind of very committed into playing this brawl style and leaving Ons to his own devices and kind of creating all of this space for him. Is that something you guys were kind of prepared for coming into that match against the Shock?
Yeah, they played the same lineup and the same style against Dallas in the tournament, and maybe the week before they played someone and they did it. So it's something that they've had for a few weeks, and I think I watched them against Dallas, and I think I said to the guys that like what they did it wasn't like perfect, you know, like I saw that it could lose. And then the danger they have when they put in Super and Moth is that they only play the Rhine for attack, so then they're in a situation where they don't have the Orisa player they want, and maybe not the I guess the difference, but it meant that their defense, they were playing people and characters which they wouldn't have done it if they had
sort of
the
uncomfortable.
So we knew as long as we could find a way to stop the attack and not let that like run over us, that when we attacked we were going to have like a pretty good chance on paper. Obviously the map ended up going differently where our defense was stronger than our attack, but at least that was the thought process behind it.
That makes sense.
There are some Reddit comments I've seen and like social media comments, and I think like if you were not someone that values like meta highly, I suppose there's an argument to be made that, I mean, at least perceptionally, the Shock haven't taken the last couple of weeks like apparently super seriously. At least that's sort of like this perception, you know, subbing in and out. Like maybe that is a super serious strategy to just like have everyone in good mental states. But the theory then goes, they tried a lot, they entertained a lot, and therefore they weren't on top of their game against you guys. Do you think there's any merit to that argument?
I don't know. I think Shock always get a lot of the benefit of the doubt when it comes to when they lose. Like I feel like the narrative when they 3-0'd us was that Shock is the most dominant team in Overwatch history.
Yeah.
And then when we 3-0'd them, it's like, oh, Shock just had an off week. And then they go and 3-0 Toronto, and everybody starts like raving lyrical about, oh, you'd never make the Shock angry. Don't do this. As if Shock weren't going to 3-0 Toronto anyway. As if like it's like, I mean, I understand why they're the best team that's ever played the game, and across these 2 seasons they've been totally dominant. But I do think that sometimes, like, if they win, it's because they're the best, and if they lose, it's just because they had a bad day. And I feel like we don't get enough credit for how we played across the series and how we were just better, like, on the day.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly. Like, that has to... Well, I won't speak for you, but, like, it sounds like it's pretty frustrating to kind of see, you know, this team get a lot of, like you said, the benefit of the doubt. Like, does that make the victory even that much sweeter? Or is it like, okay, now we have to, like, repeat and kind of show the community that we are the better team? And this wasn't just like them not trying or them, you know, practicing for the playoff meta. Like, could you explain a little bit more on that feeling of like the community's narrative perception?
Yeah, I guess to be fair, like I read the comments and it annoys me. It ticks me off a little bit, but it's not like it changes anything.
Sure.
The only people whose mental, like, I think our players know what happened in that game, and I think Shock's players knew what happened in that game, and as long as both teams understand that, it doesn't really matter if the community thinks they were good or we were good. Obviously, it would be nice to get more credit, but it doesn't change anything, you know. Like, that's kind of they've earned that right almost by being as good as they have been over the last 2 years, and I can't really blame people.
Yeah, I mean, this transitions a little bit into a subpoint that we already sort of raised with the article that sadly didn't get the traction that I thought it deserved. Like, and you pointed out, like, in that comment, basically saying, like, if a team says nobody on their team looks at social media, then they're probably lying. And from my time in esports, that's definitely the case. It's actually humorous if you're like at a big LAN, just how every third screen has Reddit open, seemingly, or like refreshing Twitter feeds, looking at notifications, specifically like the comments they will specifically receive. I mean, there is a certain social media energy that this result like caused. Do you think that's also positive in some way to just like get the confidence? Yeah. Well, it's.
I guess it depends on where you kind of like look at where the source is. Right?
I mean,
is the source
one
way, or
there's social media comments from the fans, and then there's social media comments from the players of the other team.
Weirdly enough.
How did you receive that?
The fans, yeah, it's whatever. The Shock tweets, we love the Shock tweets. We had a. I mean, that's the thing, you know, when Violet goes and cries on Twitter, he thinks he's shit talking us, but we're all sat there laughing at it, you know, because we know we've rattled him a little bit. And when Krusty makes his tweet, the same thing. I think Striker does them. I guess Coffee's tweet really like struck a nerve a little bit, but that's good, I think, for the league. Especially if it's genuine. Like, I'm definitely a believer in the fact that it's in nobody's best interest for Fusion and Shock to get on. Like, actually, like, personally, like, it actually works better for everybody if there is like a genuine rivalry there, where it's where both teams actually don't like each other and both teams genuinely want to win, you know. Like, I grew up in an era of like Man United and Arsenal, and every time we played them, it was genuine hatred. It was like, it wasn't fake. It was like players would go out there, and losing to them would be worse than anything that could happen. And I think that, especially when there's two teams like us two who are competing for top spot, the fact that when we beat them, it genuinely makes them upset and makes them want to come after us harder is a really good thing for us and for the league and for them and for everybody, really. I really think no one benefits from a league where it's PG and censored and everybody just loves each other and is like, GG's, I love you, you know? Like, there's no benefit for us to be friends with them, you know? If we want to beat them and that's our only goal, then sometimes, like, a rivalry and a little dislike is more healthy than respect, you know?
Yeah, and it's in, like, basically at every level you have exactly this phenomenon. Like in Valorant, that's like one of the major draws when, like, TSM and Sentinels, so for those that don't follow Valorant, Sentinels is a team Sinatra plays for, and is probably the star player of, when they kind of face each other, and they're the two best teams in North America, they have some sauce for each other. Like Zoms, old Overwatch heads will remember, had some interesting words towards TSM as well. So like that, these matches just like almost get double the viewership that you would expect.
People want to see them compete. People want to see them. They're kind of like hyping up some sort of weird boxing match. Like obviously, COVID. Trying to play within COVID's weird boundaries that it's set up. Like I'd love to see, the Fusion, the Shot come out and, throw some content jabs, play a little bit. I think it's been needed, like you said, for the league, for a long time, that it isn't just like completely desensitized and like washed out. And yeah, like you said, very PG. Like, yeah, a little banter is nice, like some back and forth. And if we can genuinely create like a little rivalry, like we had, early with Dallas and Fusion, even though it's really not much of a rivalry anymore, that'd be pretty good, I'd say.
I agree. Maybe it's because I'm English, but sometimes I find these almost manufactured rivalries, like the Battle for Texas and stuff, where like I find a lot of what Paintbrush does when he goes on stream and he does like these like jokey shit talk. Like I find that super boring personally.
Okay.
Whereas like the tweets and stuff that Violet and Striker and Krusty, where it's like, you guys are a bad team, like well done for waking us up and stuff. I love that far more, Like I'm far more invested in the storyline where I know the teams actually don't want to lose to each other, rather than just it's a normal game and they try and make it, the Battle of LA, the battle for Texas or something,
Yeah, and it's I suppose to a degree, like this is the first season where we're actually apart from each other, right? Like, in the sense that like beforehand we all like I assume players just met each other in the arena, like in the hallway or whatever. Maybe even teams had some teams had closer relationship to others, and like maintaining a healthy friendship or whatever between sports,
a healthy working relationship with the other teams. And, neighborly goings-ons.
That was probably much easier now that we're a little bit removed and everyone is with their tribe. I could totally see where we meet each other at the borders and just like try to stake out our territory of what we're going to engage in, right? So that's an interesting part. I think it would have actually like that effect would probably been much exacerbated by just like fan crowds at homestands. Like there's nothing that is like, for instance, imagine Washington playing like 5 times at home, right? And then 2 times just like you have like on the first meeting you have like a team like let's say Atlanta. And Dogman just starts shit talking on stage, just like getting booed. Like the second time they meet, that's amazing, right? Like that guy gets into the arena, and it's like only like who, like that's
just think about if the league were to play out kind of as we expect it to, but we still had to travel, and the Shock go to Philly. Philly's known to be pretty crazy. Like if Shock rolls up.
Yeah, we were booing the teams that were at our homestand, and we didn't even dislike them for any reason, but we were still booing them.
Yeah.
Just imagine a situation where after this loss, like Shock takes it really bad, and then Krusty writes and says, "Right, we're never scrimming again. That's it. You and us, we're never scrimming again." And then we play again, and then maybe they win, right? And then all of their tweets come in like, "Haha." And then we meet at LAN. Maybe we go to top 4, and then Krusty's like shoulder checking me in the corridors and stuff. And then next season they come to Philly. And every single fight they win, it's boos, and they walk out and the boos, and then we have to go to San Francisco, and the league can actually hype up these matches of Philly at Shock, and all of the San Francisco fans are like booing the Philly fans, and I don't know. That's, to me, at least coming from my background in football, that's what it's all about. That's the dream behind the idea of localization. I think the idea that everybody needs to be friends, I think it misses the mark in sports because that's the idea is it's your team versus the world, right? Like,
it feels like very often feels like in sports we're like almost simulating a domesticated version of war in some sense. Where it's just like let's get all the toxic stuff out of the system, and on Monday we can be like functional human beings with.
So this is your version of the Purge is sports.
Pretty much, yeah. Of course, I don't know if there's any scientific backing. I will say like the tribal communities forming around sports definitely feels like it. Like I don't want to go into that metaphor too much again, but to a degree, like if you're, for instance, like a team that actually does pretty well and the normal expectation is that you usually win, like I feel like the act of going to a sports game then almost feels like going to church to a degree, where it's like you just meet up in a gigantic building and you sing songs, and then like
and you kind of like praise the idea of like these
have a
people
community,
doing these great tasks.
That have a community, and just
there's
like
definitely.
I mean, like in a more secularized world, that there has to be something that fills the void of community, and I think sports to a large degree fills that. And that was like the thing is with homestands was always that we didn't have them regularly enough to build habit. So they're more like one time events, and I feel like also the number 5, for instance, for Washington would have probably not worked to establish anything.
Thank you, COVID. I really didn't want to have to see Washington play at home and see that empty crowd. Oof.
Yeah, I'm
acrobats every week. Come on,
yeah.
let's not do that again.
I don't know how many would have actually showed up, but like, yeah, I mean that's the long-term dream, right? To have like regular appearances where like you can actually make it a habit to a degree, and maybe we need a different system of like maybe watch parties are become that for people within the city when the teams travel, because I don't think you can expect your fans to travel to every single homestand with a team to the same degree that, for instance, in local right leagues you would do. So maybe we need to foster like just like remote watching to a high degree, because that's already the esports experience for the vast majority of people anyway. And even like the playing field is virtual in the distance, so to speak, on some servers, so to speak. So yeah, like I think there's a lot to be done culturally while still maintaining like a sense of community where we still meet in physical places and like form bonds and friendships and whatnot over these events. But yeah, that's a tangent that happens when John isn't here to reel us in. So
I mean, to kind of rope Chris in here, I don't know if like this has been something that you guys have talked about with like upper management and like the operational team. Like, is this something that might be, you know, aligned for the future for the Fusion for Philadelphia? You know, trying to better create online spaces to not foster a community, because I think that's obviously what everybody's trying to do in the first place, but to try and take the lessons that COVID has taught us and try to apply them for the future, creating, you know, I know that going into this year, a lot of people were like looking at VR and AR to kind of like better create like not an arena experience, but something that's a little bit more unique and just kind of an experience. Is that something you guys kind of talked about?
I mean, I think we do it. I think quite a few teams do it. We do like watch parties in the Discord or on Zoom with the fans, and we not sell tickets, but you have to reserve because there's only 100 people out in or something. But we try and do that aspect of it, and I think it's quite regularly attended by people. You normally get the full 100 people in a Zoom call watching. Yeah, I guess I don't know what else we're doing. I'm not really like too into that.
100%.
But yeah, I guess a little bit.
Gotcha.
I suppose like one aspect that, and we won't talk about every single game, of course, that's kind of like a waste of time because we once again had like a half of the matches were 3-0s. But like one interesting pattern was, to a degree, I think if I am Fusion, I love to see these results. Like Shock didn't look amazing, let's say. Or let's say this, Shock looked very, very beatable for you guys. To the degree, like I think if you play 10 best of 5s, then you probably win like at least 8 of those that weekend. You look at Mayhem, who kind of like dropped the spaghetti against Valiant. You look at Paris, who played Atlanta close, like from an NA point of view, your direct competitors, they aren't peaking, are they, at the end of the season?
No. A lot of them are really struggling with consistency and have been all season. Like, I feel really bad for Atlanta because I watched that game against Paris and I actually don't know how they lost it. Like, that last fight is it's literally unlosable, but they found a way. And then it snowballs into a situation where they go against Vancouver and it's looking good, and then they find a way to throw that one away as well. And then, yeah, I mean, I think that teams like Atlanta, like Gladiators, maybe like Mayhem, are just constantly in this situation where they're just trying to put like a few good results together, and they always just mess up one, and then their momentum goes, and they have to like start again. But we also know that a lot of those teams are good enough to beat us on the day, which is kind of what's scary, because if like a good version of the Gladiators could have beaten us this season, like we played Atlanta close at times this season, Mayhem did beat us, Paris did beat us. So all of these teams can be good, but we know that there's like such a high variance in the level that they bring compared to us, where we're pretty consistent. The other also interesting thing to note is almost every team that I mentioned, like in this, like maybe between like third and sixth, all maybe with the exception of Gladiators, really excelled at like double shield metas. And if the meta goes away from that, it's going to be really interesting to see how Atlanta, Florida, Paris can all play if it goes to a dive meta or something new, because we haven't seen too much of them playing it, and at least not with too much success.
You kind of wish that it would not hero pools, but like these metas were kind of spaced apart so that you could kind of get a good read on exactly how everybody's playing. Is there like a team that, or are you worried about like some sort of team like kind of like hiding behind the fact that they haven't necessarily shown how good they are at something like dive, or something that resembles more brawl, or something that completely hasn't ever been seen before?
I'm pretty sure a lot of these teams had the opportunity to play dive, especially in the last month or so, because I think it's been pretty important in the meta, and the fact that they haven't is probably a good thing for us more than a bad thing. It's not like they're hiding behind double shield, but I think if we go back to the analogy of bar charts when I was on here one of the first times, like it's super possible that these teams know internally their double shield bar chart is a lot higher than their dive. And I guess for us on the fusion, I guess Shock are probably in a similar boat. We want as much variance with the meta as possible, because we probably genuinely feel like our roster is truly meta proof, like at least we, and probably Shock can say that we were good at the Rhine meta at the start of the season, and then we had a lot of success even in double shield, and we still got to 2 finals on that meta, and then also dive, we've been one of the better teams, so we're super comfortable no matter what they throw at us that we can adapt to it, and whereas I guess the teams in like the tier slightly below us still need to like prove that they can play everything.
And kind of looking at playoffs, I don't think Philly really gets enough credit for being that consistent team, like you said, a consummate first place team going through the regular season to, monthly tournament finals. Is that consistency something you guys are looking to kind of like wield, that kind of meta proof nature that you guys have built within this roster? Is that something you guys are looking to kind of like really abuse going into not only a meta that looks like it's going to be quite peculiar, but also, the end of this season? Is that something that you guys really feel like you can kind of rely on? And I think you guys have proved it, but kind of in your words, rather, what do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I think when Roston built this roster in the off season, I think one thing he said that he was really, really keen to have a good regular season. It's a really horrible place to be, where these teams that I mentioned, where it's kind of where we were last year, right? We were always felt like we would scrape a few wins together against bad teams, and we always felt like if we just got one result against one of the top teams, then maybe we could get on a roll and we could like level up, and it never came. And it's really, really like frustrating for the mentality of the team and just being inside one when you're constantly up and down and up and down and up and down, and for us, the fact that every time we lost, we were able to bounce back stronger the week after is like an incredibly good sign. And it means that, especially coming into like a double elimination bracket, whatever happens, I'm not worried that we're going to lose our mental, even if we do end up losing a series. Because I think we at least have the confidence that we can bounce back pretty quickly.
The fear, of course, is that you're going to be the NYXL of season 3, right? Super consistent season. Actually, not like even when we criticized NYXL for their tournament play, it wasn't actually that terrible in stage playoffs, where like they still have a positive win record, I think, in playoffs series anyway. Is there because here's the problem. We have built bar charts, right? As you said. We have the bar chart of double shield, we have the bar chart of dive. Now we're seemingly possibly cracking open a new bar chart, which is 0 main tanks. Is that not something that could that makes it a little don't you have a certain feeling about that?
I mean, there is a world in which this meta becomes crazy, and it's the first meta all season, which isn't good for us, and we have a poor playoffs performance, and everybody immediately attributes it to the fact that Philly can't play in big games, Philly sucks in playoffs, and they don't and then what could happen is that it's just a horrible meta for us. We struggle in scrims, and then we lose, and then everyone paints a narrative about the team, and that sticks with us because that's already something that a lot of people are talking about, right? Like the Fusion is always runner-up and stuff. Even regular season, even though we won North America, we're still technically second place. So yeah, I understand that, but I think we know internally that that's not true. I said it after the Paris loss when I came on here, but sometimes when good teams play each other, it's just a close match when one team wins and one team loses, and there isn't some mystic reason that Paris were able to clutch it out and that we weren't. It's just that's kind of just how sports is. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and it's just happened that we lost a few times when it mattered most.
Here's the thing, I agree. If I'm the competitor, I understand this, right? For instance, if your matches all go to 3-2 and it's very close, then I think it's very obvious that the smallest of differences could have changed the outcome of the series. One pretty big difference is catching a better meta than your opponent, right? So
yeah,
there is I feel at least from the outside, I'm not sure if it's this feels like a one of those situations where it's good for you to not believe that to be true as a competitor, but if I'm getting into a series and I know yes, we're pretty good in this meta, but our opponents are actually mega nuts in this meta and they literally couldn't have been better. For instance, maybe the Florida series that you had, then it's hard to not feel a way about that when that's at least 5% modifier on the outcome, right?
No, for sure. I guess one thing we're lucky is that there was 13 teams in our division in America, and we beat every single one. Which means that no matter who we come across, we know we can beat them. Obviously, we also beat New York, but maybe that doesn't mean anything for now. So at least mentally, there's no team that we would feel like we can't beat, or that a meta is going to be really bad for us in. And then hey, maybe this if it is actually, which I definitely have doubts, if it is a double off tank meta, then that might end up favoring a team with 2 world-class off tanks more than the other teams who only have one.
Is there any?
Are you guys interested in kind of the styles clashing within regards to the grand finals, with obviously the 2 top teams from each region kind of competing against each other? Is that something you guys are kind of oh, I wonder what Shanghai might bring to the table? Is that something you guys have kind of talked about internally? Maybe a particular team from Asia that you guys would like to kind of test your mettle against?
Well, Shanghai's a team everyone wants to test themselves against.
Sure.
We definitely haven't had any conversations about how do we beat Shanghai or how do we do against the team.
Sure.
We really have to beat what's in front of us before we can even contemplate that.
Sure.
We'll have a few weeks in a Korean hotel quarantining to figure out how to play against those teams. I think my gut instinct tells me, I think most people seem to believe that APAC is the stronger region, and obviously I might be slightly biased, but I think it couldn't be further from the truth. I think if you did a top 5 or a top 6 power rankings across the league, I think only one team from Asia makes it in, and I'm pretty sure that both Paris, Mayhem, And then maybe there's an argument that Valiant would be better than the best of the rest in Asia. But again, that's probably a hot take where people are going to disagree with me. And I also think you have to consider that the fact that us, Paris and Shock have been in the same region, we've probably leveled each other up a lot. Whereas I think that the lack of depth, at least in my opinion, in Asia might not have helped them. I mean, you have to consider like how good Krusty's teams have always been, and the fact that there's teams who've been able to keep up with that across the entire season probably indicates that we're all pretty strong. Whereas I don't know if you can necessarily say the same in Asia. Although I do think on the dive comp, we've definitely took stuff from Shanghai, and we've been impressed with how they've played it. A lot of my instincts personally was when I saw those teams play a double shield that I thought we would beat them. But I have to admit that on dive, those teams are really strong, especially Shanghai.
I mean, to be fair, there's also something about Asia that's just so volatile, where it's like, I definitely had points in this season where I thought, okay, Shanghai is obviously the best, but then like Guangzhou, Hangzhou, and even NYXL are actually pretty good teams. And then they drop the ball in the next meta, or like it doesn't even have to be necessarily a meta change. It can just be an absolute spaghetti splatter the next week for no apparent reason. Like it's especially Spark is like this, Soul is like this. Even NYXL doesn't make that much sense to me. Guangzhou I understand to a higher degree because they had some visa issues, and like theoretically I think like maybe I'm simping a little hard here, but I think Nero would have probably played the entire season if they had the chance to field him. So yeah, it's I think at this point in time, I think that take is probably right. That even though, to be fair, we once again last week just had like the drop off of the good teams. Now here's one thing that I also wanted to ask, because I didn't give this too much thought, but I was very surprised how high people valued gladiators in their power rankings. How do you think about the gladiators?
My favorite team. Good in scrims, not so good in tournaments, maybe.
Interesting.
To be honest, even the stuff. I mean, obviously, if you go on my Twitter, you guys see the only thing I tweet about is shade on gladiators. I know I see what they're doing this season, and I see a lot of similarities of how I was and how we were last season, and I see them falling into a lot of the same mistakes that we are. We know that they're a team that no one like. Okay, the way I describe it is this: if you're a top team, you don't want to play gladiators because you there's a feeling that they can beat you. But if you're a bottom team, you really want to play gladiators because there's a feeling that you can beat them. You know, like they're a team with like such high variance that like. Every time we've picked them in the tournaments, we weren't like, especially, you know, when people on the shows and they go through, gladiators are often like the bottom seed, but teams often pick like Valiant and other teams ahead of them, you know? Because everyone internally, like on paper, they spend a lot of money. They have like a pretty good roster. They should probably be better than they are. And I think on paper, their roster is definitely better than their record shows. But they're another team that you can say where there's just games where they look good after a few games, and then they really just drop the ball in a game where there's no way you can expect it. And maybe they're one of those teams who has a good playoff run inside them, and then, hey, who knows? Like the whole season gets revised and forgotten.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Fusion Season 1. Or London Spitfire for that matter. Yeah.
London
Absolutely,
Season 1 for sure.
Yeah. Are they the team with the widest divide between scrim performance and matchday performance in your experience?
Could be, yeah. Atlanta are pretty good in scrims too. I mean, honestly, a lot of these teams have like far closer win rates to us in scrims than they do in tournaments. And I think there's probably like deeper reasons for that. Like I have this like theory that last year we had such high variance in tournaments because we weren't particularly disciplined in like especially in terms of like goats. Like we didn't have like what I can say this year is like KDG's coaching style and the way like him Moby have like worked a lot has been hyper consistency. Like everybody is hyper prepared. Everybody knows their role. Everyone knows how to use every single cooldown, how to position every single fight, how to like expect every single thing the enemy does. And I think when you're like over prepared, it's really easy to just play that same level in tournaments, you know. Whereas I think some teams, at least I see in scrims, and I think maybe Gladiators is one of them, where I see their players clearly have like a lot of freedom, right? And I see if you ever watch OG's Orisa, it's one of my favorite things to watch because the amount of times he's flanked on the backline is actually quite funny, you know. But when you have players with so much freedom, then that variance gets massively affected by the pressure of tournaments, right? Whereas if you're a player and you have to use your sleep dart for this, and you have to use your nade for this, and when they have this ult, you need to step back, and when they have this ult, you need to step forward. It's all about how you remember the flow chart almost of what we've been like coached and prepped, and then it's a lot easier to keep that that steady performance in a tournament. Whereas when in scrims, like you go and you're like, you know what, feeding is good. I'm gonna go take this like hyper aggressive flank. Oh, I killed 3 people, and then all of a sudden I get a bit nervous in the tournament, and I don't want to take that huge flank again.
Yeah.
Then obviously there is this huge variance, and then all of a sudden you've got this, I don't know, just flanking Orisa that's not flanking anymore, and that you've been used to your Orisa flanking this whole time in scrims or something, you know?
It kind of reminds me of a lot of the stuff that went on, or maybe still goes on with like League of Legends when I followed that, because a lot of like the NA scrim culture was like this overly aggressive, you know, in practice, but like nobody is proactive in the live matches.
Yeah.
Is that something kind of to the same degree that you're kind of referencing here, where like scrims are completely almost divorced of what actually happens on like the match day?
It's possible that aggression isn't necessarily the same thing as freedom.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that, yeah, it's hard. I'm trying to think of a good way to explain it, you know, like,
I have
in
one
scrim-
from another coach. Should I inject some terminology?
me.
Okay, here's
help
the
me.
thing, and I'm not going to say who said it, and Joe probably already knows who I'm referring to. But
It depends on what
there's a
verbiage is used.
terminology where the coaching staff calls that inability to deliver, like, or playing differently, being pumpkins. Where it's like the idea is like they in this, is it Cinderella story where it's just like, yeah, they turn back into the pumpkins that the beautiful carriages and whatever were made from. That's
Yeah, I've got some ideas on who that might be, but we'll leave that for another day.
right. But yeah, that's sorry, I broke you off with so feel free to use the intuition pumpkins.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to. What's the opposite of the pumpkin? What did
The
they?
carriage.
Okay,
The
so
pumpkin
that is-
becomes the beautiful carriage that Cinderella gets into as the
it's
story.
a lot easier to be a carriage in scrims where if you mess up, no one cares and no one says anything to you, and it's very easy to be like a high risk player, but it's obviously a lot harder when the pressure's on because you know that if the risk doesn't work, you lose your team, the fight.
Gotcha.
Whereas one thing I can say about us, and to be fair, I'm certain that at least like I would argue that Paris and Shock have similar philosophies. It's like what you get in scrims is what you get in tournaments. Either their players have the mentality where they can play the same like hyper aggressive style in scrims and do it in tournaments because they don't care. I think Sparkle is like Sparkle chain feeds in scrims, but then he chain feeds in like tones, you know. So it's like at least you know what you're gonna get with him, and then like his play style is obviously one where his mentality and his attitude is he can pull off that style. And then for us, I think we're maybe on the other end of the spectrum where we play with a little bit more discipline, both in scrims and in tournaments. So our gameplay looks the same, you know.
Yeah, I feel like the entirety of Paris is, or a lot of players on Paris just love to feed, just love to lemming in.
They just go.
Like FD God is in that same spectrum of player where it's just like, I think he's still leading the death count, by the way. Like, of course, that's heavily playtime dependent, but yeah, that's some trivia here. It's interesting that you say, like, I heard basically Shock in some metas are like the ugly duckling, where it's just like not that dominant in scrims, but then once it comes playtime, it's just like it's over.
Well, yeah, I shouldn't. I'm not saying that like Shock aren't an aggressive team and their players don't take risks. I'm just one thing I can say wholeheartedly about the Shock, which is probably their greatest strength, and I think when Drunkbuck came on this podcast, he said something similar, like where he wants to play in the most pressure situation. He wants to have a crowd of 10 million people, and he wants like everything to be on the line, you know? Because if Shock's scrim level is here, their tournament level is here. Whereas almost every team has like at least like a 20% drop off, you know? And then depending on either how prepared you are or just the mentality of your players, the drop off can be bigger and bigger and bigger. But Shock, that's the one thing, is like it doesn't matter if it's a regular season game or a grand final, their players have that mentality of being able to play at the same level. And I think that's why you've seen every time there's a tournament final or grand finals or a big game, they look better, and it's not because they're necessarily playing better, it's just because their drop-off doesn't exist, whereas the other teams, if this is just a regular season match, my drop-off's 20%, it's a playoff game, it's 30%, it's a grand final, it's 50%, you know, whereas Shock, this is the level, this is what we play, always, you know?
Yeah. Do you think there's ever a possibility that teams can go above that scrim level?
Personally, like, I think a lot of people will tell you, like, I'm better in tournaments than I am in scrims.
Exactly.
But I think that, like, I don't know. I personally don't believe that. I think players just play the same, and then they look better because their opponents drop off. You know, like I mean, there's definitely examples of sports of people that you would consider like big game players, like Cristiano Ronaldo. Every time it's a big game, like he always seems to score, right? But I'm not convinced. Maybe it's different for him. Maybe it's different in esports and sports. But I find it hard to believe that people can actually like level up on stage compared. Although, to be fair, Hisu always does play better in tournaments than he does in scrims, so maybe I'm just chatting shit.
Hisu, big game player. All right, very good.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Fantastic. I think that's a excellent segue. Okay, so I suppose it was a little bit, let's say, a little bit optimistic, I would say, too. Like, I did a top 5 rookies coming into the league, and I suppose I should have rather valued like end results of how people will perceive it rather than like where the actual player levels are, because Hisu made my best rookies coming into the league list. I think it was 4 or 5. Of course, the perception is very hard to establish and also have him become Rookie of the Year simply because, like, he has copy in front of him. Like, that's a big one, right? How is that currently not the case? What's the rationale behind that? Is that something like, is Hisu on these specific picks actually like just like the better choice? Is that something where you wanted to be wider on various positions? If there was a meta to come around where like you 100% need to consistently play both, and what's the rationale there?
They all of our DPS players to a degree have if it's like this massive circle of heroes, like they all take their specific chunk, and then obviously some overlap a little bit. I think that Hisu's obviously played a lot over the last month, but he hasn't really played much that you would expect Carpe to play, right? Like he's played the majority of the Sombra, and then obviously there's maps where he's playing like Widow, but that's normally because on the other half of the map he's playing Sombra, right?
Right.
So like people obviously pointed towards, Carpe didn't play against Shock in the finals, like Hisu's better, but that's just our dive strategy included Hisu because Hisu's a better Sombra than Carpe. In fact, I think Hisu's Sombra might be the best in the league. So one thing that inadvertently worked out really nicely about picking up Hisu was that him and Carpe, even though they're both hit scan heroes, their hero pool doesn't overlap a huge amount. What Carpe loves to play, he's very good at, and then the heroes where Carpe struggled at, like maybe the Reaper or the Sombra, I think Hisu is excellent at those heroes, and that's allowed where both of them are able to play in specific metas, and then at the same time, there's often metas where double hit scan's absolutely fine, and that allows us to play both. It's like they're both big circles, and there's a huge overlap because almost anything that like Hisu can play a lot of the long range hit scans too, and it's not like Carpe's Sombra or Reaper's bad by any stretch. But then that's kind of how we've been working them so far. And then I think Hisu's been one of the reasons why I think we've had like a slight uptick towards the end, because I love what that boy brings when he plays on stage or in tournaments. I think he's for a rookie, I think his mindset is actually perfect. I genuinely love it.
Mm.
Yeah, it's kind of weird to think of him as a rookie because he has been performing so good within his first season. Obviously, we've talked about how much Carpe does for the team. Could you talk a little bit, or maybe expand on maybe
Yeah.
Hisu's kind of like social role within the roster when he's in?
Well, he's the youngest, which if you understand Korean culture is like it's quite significant. But to be honest, the more I've worked with Hisu, if all of the other runaway players have been brought up in the same culture, I actually think that's an unbelievable feat team because I think the mindset that they've built into Hisu is exactly what I wanted. Like he has this saying where he says like when we talk about like for example, why isn't Decay playing or why isn't this player
Sure.
playing, and then there's often a lot of stories inside, and this Decay, well, I guess maybe it was, I don't know, maybe I don't want to talk about, but there's sometimes players say, oh, I don't want to play this hero, right? And whenever Hisu hears that story, he hates it because he thinks that's the most unprofessional thing ever. He says that no matter what anyone tells me, if my coach wants me to play Junkrat like he did this week, he'd never played Junkrat before, he's going to do it and he's not going to complain. I think he absolutely believes that a professional player is a professional player, and my job is to play on stage and do my best no matter what the situation is. And he always says every time we win a map, he says the first thing he says, "Okay, guys, be humble, which I think is cute, but it's also like I think that's it. Like he's one of the few players who still has like that really raw excitement, when he plays. Like you can see it if you look at the face cams, especially against Paris after he wins that Numbani, he has this giant smile on his face because he's genuinely really enjoying what he's doing. And I think that's what I said. Maybe at the start of the year when I came on this podcast is what's great about what we did this year was when we brought in the rookies like Hisu, Alarm, and Astro. There's still a raw enthusiasm of loving to play Overwatch, which infects the whole team. And the fact that Hisu is able to bring that whilst he's playing in the big games, in like finals and semi-finals of tournaments, is like a really good sign, So I just think he honestly he has a lot of fun when he's out there, and that's one of the hardest things to coach people is how to have fun. But it's extremely important.
I need to start asking around for coaches on some of these extra runaway players because you kind of like planted that seed of like, okay, now that I remember it, Runner's been coaching this team in very peculiar ways, running Hawksall on Lucio and putting him on main tank in certain scenarios. So this kind of like checks out through history. But I wonder if people like Yaki, people like from this old runaway cord, still kind of have that, or maybe have, or could resonate with that kind of stay humble and just completely bought into the coach's philosophy.
Well, I think if you read Swing Chip's tweets that she likes to put out, there's a lot of like maybe she cherry picks the moments where they're all being the nicest and stuff, but there does seem to be like a pretty wholesome and like positive attitude in amongst that team, and they obviously have a lot of runaway players there. So maybe it's Cookie, maybe it's his mindset because obviously he coached them last year, or maybe it's just it's a bigger picture of runaway. But I definitely think, at least personally, from now on, I'm kind of like more bought into the runaway hype train, and in the future, I'm gonna like place their players like above others just because of the mindset I hope that they can come in with. Or maybe I'm just selling Hisu short and it's just a him.
Maybe it's just a him thing.
He just has a good mindset and it's nothing to do with runaway, but whatever it is, I hope it's replicable,
Okay, I'm going to be a little bit unfair and burden you with a question that kind of your GM set up for this. So
yeah,
you like Carpe has a specific hero pool. When those heroes are meta, he plays. That same is true for Hisu, like Ricky said, Reaper and Sombra. Where is DK fitting in there?
I don't know. It's a good question. It's going to be, love Rustin to death. He gave us his coaches. He gave us a lovely situation in terms of good luck finding a way to play both Poco and Fury, which obviously as a coach is a lovely situation. It's a nice problem, because you've got two of the best in the world, and ultimately we found a way to do it to a degree, and then maybe that becomes a similar situation with DK. I think great players can always play together, and I think DPS is probably the role where it's easiest to do so. I don't think like you need a flex and you need a a hit scan. Like I think DK's Genji's fine.
Yeah.
Like I think almost anything that he could have played if he was on our team, it wouldn't have been a problem. Whether or not he's serious and he's actually going to go talk to him in the off season, I guess I don't know. Or maybe he just wanted to shit on Dallas a little bit because that's always fun.
Sure,
Who
sure.
knows?
Yeah. Now that's of course like there's definitely like an argument to be made that Decay also like he first got known for his Genji. Actually recently opened like a time capsule video I did. Just like it was interesting to see how much one forgets about like the heroes that people play. Like obviously like at the time that was October 2018. Like I was apparently very like everyone was just talking about Sparkle's Farah, and that was the big story. When in my mind was always like, okay, Genji, or like if someone had asked me, Genji and Doom, right? And so that it's interesting how players develop. Also, I will say we've definitely seen that this idea of like hard hit scans and hard flex kind of died this season. Like we have Edison that suddenly like was this Widow one trick, and now Edison plays like Tracer and Genji, and then we had what kind of a player would be pretty? I just had another name, but yeah, it's not an unusual thing for very talented players to just break open those like borders that we have artificially set up for them. I suppose also that comes with just like who they are within the team. That's always, of course, also a part of the equation. But yeah, it's very interesting to see. Like, ironically, this is the first season where the idea of a flex tank instead of an off tank sort of makes sense, because suddenly off tanks didn't have to be just on Diva. Like, what's flexible about that? But now, like, the idea, like, there's just so many more like flex and hyperflex players. Where that's a very interesting development. It's also I think just like hyper talent, and with talent I mean not just like the inherent ability to have very good hand-eye coordination or whatever. Like a talent is also being able to just grind into, like, go through the grind, right? And be resistant towards that aspect, or to just like, to a degree, maybe to have a lower sense of ego or whatever, and to be a personality that takes criticism better or whatever it is, right? Like hyper good people. I feel like if you're world class on one hero, you can probably learn that on another. And I just realized that this theory breaks off with your brother. Probably. Do you think you could be good on another hero?
I mean, I'm convinced if maybe minus like really hard hit scan heroes, if Phil had the same hours on any hero that he had in Doomfist, he'd be good at it. Doomfist is maybe one of the ones where like the more playtime, there's so much to learn about the hero that the more playtime, the more there is to master, maybe. Whereas if you play McCree, there's only like like aim becomes like a huge part of this, your skill ceiling and your ability to play him, right? But I think the main point of what you were saying is true. I think I said it to you in one of the interviews we did, Joe, about Alarm, and I said that what we say about him on the team is he's just good at Overwatch, you know, and it's not a situation about he can only play heroes within his role. Like if we said Sado can't play Hog Alarm, do you want to play it? I'm convinced he'd be fine at playing it, you know. And I think that's almost certainly going to be the case for Carpe, for DK, for a lot of these like world class players. Is if Genji or whatever becomes meta and it's their job to learn one, they'll be able to do it. There's no reason they can't, you know.
And it's those players that I wish, and I know that I think I still kind of stand with Rollock and saying that it was probably healthy for the game, but I do wonder what a world, what a like Philly Fusion team might look like if we had like these very fluid kind of metas where we had, you know, supports having to go to do it to a DPS character, or tanks having to back off and play something a little bit more supportive. Taking somebody like Alarm, taking somebody like Carpe, looking at how Hoxall has been super flexible, Libero, like all of these different players. I think Architect really kind of blew my mind, coming in from being one of the better Genji players from the Apex era and coming in and showcasing like a pretty solid hit scan. Like it really doesn't do the players justice and how deep their game is when we kind of limit them, even though I think it is probably better to have that kind of structure just for the idea of the game as a whole. But yeah, it's pretty scary at how good at Overwatch some of these players are. To your team in particular, talking even before the Overwatch League was starting, like picking the brains of people who are a little bit more closer to the original kind of inaugural season rosters. People were like, yeah, Carpe might just be the best Genji on their team. Like he's not even supposed to play Genji, but he could probably challenge people on that. It's wild.
I think I've even seen both Shadow and Alarm be top 20 on DPS and top 500 this season.
Yeah.
On,
Violet's another
Secret
one.
Smiths or whatever.
Yeah.
So I guess Shadow's one
Wow.
who's he's so mechanically good that he's it's almost a waste of his talent to be a main tank,
I mean, maybe he doesn't need to.
Show off that, Yeah, maybe this is the meta for Shadow, Well, I'm actually 100% sure if he has to play a Zarya or a Hog, that Shadow would be really, really, really good at it, better than the absolute majority of main tanks for sure.
Do we kind of want to go into the foresight into what playoff meta might look like and tackling that? Because I'm hearing some bizarre stirrings of Hog Zarya, Ball, Hog, as a team going into this strange wasteland, with the next week you guys presumably have off. First, let's kind of go into that. What's the kind of plan or roadmap going forward into playoffs? Are you guys taking some time off to kind of reset, or are you guys completely going ham and boot camping the entire way there?
Yeah, absolutely. We our philosophy, at least since the format of the league changed with the tournaments and stuff, our philosophy has very much been work hard and then we'll reward you with genuine time off. I think after the first tournament we had 2 weeks off, and then I think we also had 2 weeks off after the second tournament. So we have a week off now, whereas a lot of teams are still scrimming. One good thing about locking up first or one of the top seeds is we probably have the teams are going to play 4 or 5 days before us. We're going to get a little bit more time, so we're not going to get necessarily punished. And yeah, we almost kill ourselves during the weeks with these long days and working really hard to win the tournament. And then obviously we maintain that because we really wanted to beat Shock too. So it's only fair to the players that we say if you're going to work these hours and you're going to put in the effort you're going to, that when we get the opportunity we're not gonna keep making you play. So yeah, we have probably I think it's 8 days in total since the Shock game off. And then we'll probably get at least 2 weeks practice before we have to play the first round of playoffs.
This is a question where you possibly have to say no comment, because we were concerned or interested. Let's say you guys make it top 2, and then you have to travel to Asia, and then there's quarantine. Will you have the ability to practice in quarantine?
I really, 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 really hope so. From what I hear, it's positive. I don't know. I think everybody's saying yes, but at the same time,
it's hard. It definitely is hard. I would totally understand if it wasn't possible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's government-run hotels and stuff, right? So I'm trying to understand how Blizzard's going to be able to phone up a Korean government hotel and say, "Hey, can you make an exception and let us move these PCs in and stuff?" But yeah, for now it seems, from what we've heard, is it will be, because if we have to go to Korea and we have 2 weeks of no practice, and all these Asian teams that are over there get 2 weeks of practice, we come out of no Overwatch and we have 1 week of practice and then a game. We actually have no chance. There's actually no way for us to win under those. It's the most unfair thing possible. So to me, I think it's a huge breaking point. If the league can't find a way to get us practice while we're quarantining, then I think we can't do it. There's no competitive integrity whatsoever. You just hand Shanghai the title and just let it be done, Also, I think I heard recently that Korea's had an almost a second spike over the last week. So So who knows? The situation is so turbulent, you know, it
Yeah,
changes all the time.
100%.
So
Yeah.
so all really we can do is where we can is just focus on the next one and try and at least make it so that they have to make the choice if we're going or not.
I
and not
get.
another team.
I guess it's only fair then to shoot the Asian team's knees and just like give them 2
They
weeks
can't
of
practice
quarantine
for
as
2
well.
weeks either.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know how,
How
you
would
would
you
enforce.
even try to mandate
I mean, you
that?
can call up the local prison. Like that's.
Oh my god!
That's
Just put him in a box
everything
for 2
for
weeks.
competitive. I mean, that's where you guys presumably will land because yeah, it's a good question. Like I think like bringing the PCs in is not an issue per se because I think I heard one of the Guangzhou boys did this. And then, of course, there's like gaming laptops and whatnot. It's not amazing, but I suppose it's workable. But I think the internet connection is the bigger concern.
But actually, I think that might be okay because it's Korea, you know.
Yeah.
The internet over there is ridiculous.
Insane.
I'm sure even
Everything's-
hotels have like perfect connection.
Yeah.
Probably play on like a hotspot in Korea and you'd have better ping than you would over here, you know.
Sure.
100%.
Yeah. No, it's just like one of the concerns. Of course, once
Oh, for
again,
sure.
like you can only harp so much on competitive integrity if it's just like
Sure.
governmentally decided that it is that way. What can you realistically do other than find some weird workaround?
Well, the only solution is to have a North American and an Asian champion, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And just have no way for them to play each other.
That would.
Just as much as that might suck, it's.
Mhm.
I think it's a lot fairer for everybody than to force the American teams to go through 2 weeks of no practice, you know.
Or kind of take the situation as it is. You know, hopefully, to your point, I hope that this was thought about. You know,
I'm sure it is. I'm
in
sure we're not
depth
the
and
first.
100%. And I give the league that credit, and I'm sure they've spent enough time and probably have some sort of workarounds. But if the situation were to worsen in wherever, you know, finals is supposed to be held, is there kind of a backup plan? Do you do, you know, an Asian and a North American kind of champion and have them meet up at a later date that, you know, you extend the time or try to be a little bit more flexible in that? I'd love for that to be the case. I hope that we just don't completely never, you know, get to see true international competition this season. I think that'd be kind of disappointing. Even if it is just kind of like a quick, you know, 2 teams fly out, play a good series after, you know, a month of quarantining and practice, you know, I don't know, meet halfway.
Here's the thing, Joe. We actually already can read between the lines that some workarounds are being planned because
Sure.
like from this pickup rule that like if someone was unable to travel, then like the wording is very specifically must have an Asian visa.
Mm-hmm.
So like much like others would play probably apart from the team simply just then. Like maybe you like depending on the nationality of the respective player or maybe the entire team, maybe there's I'm not sure what kind of visa processes even are going down. Like maybe teams are applying for multiple countries or whatever and see what sticks. And then you just like I'm not sure what the ping differences, for instance, between China and Korea would be.
Sure.
But like depending, and I suppose that also depends on the region that you get to visit. But yeah, like I think there's theoretical workarounds where you can't have like a LAN environment or whatever it is, but that was planned. But you could have at least like the
like a controlled studio type of deal.
I mean, even just like everyone sits in their hotel room, has a good working station, and then just plays via the internet these competitive matches. I don't think that is a huge like downgrade from the other experience. We wouldn't have audiences most likely anyway, so that experience is gone. But yeah, like it's of course very challenging. Like that definitely the case, right?
Even in the announcement they make a point to say that in the event that it's unsafe, that they're just going to do 2 regional champions. So it's obviously something that they like have to heavily consider. I wouldn't want to be the one making that decision, like having to judge like the league like because everybody wants to see it, but then having
Of course.
safety and then competitive integrity and how to find a solution that benefits everyone. I'm glad that I'm just sitting here instead.
Yeah.
And credit to the Overwatch League brass.
Yeah.
I want to kind of keep with the mantra of credit where credit's due. That's not an easy decision to make. I'm glad that they've thought it ahead in advance, and good on you.
Yeah.
So meta.
Now,
Okay.
like one more
dive-
question
go ahead,
towards
go ahead.
the and this is a little ignorant. We are playing out the North American and the Asian like grand final, right? Because like theoretically you could just say, well, this team is the first seed based on loser
yeah.
bracket and
Yeah.
winner bracket, and then
I'd
we're just
imagine
sending
so.
them over, and we actually don't have champions.
I haven't even thought of that.
So
Yeah, kind of. But I also
Eric?
think there's something a little bit weird about if we're playing like winners finals, for example. No, because there's going to be a winners. We're never going to play like the grand finals for North America, right? Like the winners bracket winner is just going to go to Korea, and then the losers bracket winner is going to go to Korea. But those two aren't going to match up again.
Gotcha.
So presumably, if they cancel Korea, then those two teams will just play, and then
Okay.
that'll be your
Okay.
North
Yeah,
American
that's a perfect
Gotcha.
plan.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I assumed the seeding would be decided maybe by the North American final anyway. But I guess that's a good compromise, because then you still have a grand final to substitute if in the event that it
In either
just
case.
can't come together, and it feels like an extra thing rather than one that was already planned. So that's actually a pretty good contingency plan.
Yeah.
If all things fall apart. Yeah, that's a type of redundancy I love. Okay, so meta.
Yes.
So okay, we're of course not just extrapolating from ranked experiences, but we have some contenders matches to go on, right? We can assume that there's some cross-pollination between contenders and our teams, at least at the touching points, and maybe that then spreads to all the teams in a good torp virus way. So I guess we have a prior to say that currently we don't have main tanks in the meta. What's your initial feeling on that?
My initial feeling is in my head, I can never understand how Zarya Hug can be meta. Like, what does it offer you? Like, it's not possible, right? But if the heroes are just strong, then I can almost certainly be proven wrong. I do think if it does come to pass that that's the meta, that is one of the most interesting tests of teams' roster creating abilities that a patch has ever had. I think as over time you've seen, like, if you remember when Overwatch was like maybe like pre-Owl, there was a situation where main supports had to play Lucio and then main tanks had to play like Ryan and Winston, and then over time, and then one thing that happened maybe this season or the end of last season was that main supports for the first time got tested on their ability to play heroes that wasn't Lucio and Mercy. We saw a lot of people having to play like Brig, which is I think a pretty difficult hero. Like a lot of them had to play BAP. Obviously, some have even played like Zen and stuff. And then what you've seen, at least what I've seen internally, is which main supports have been able to, which were truly really struggling outside of like a Lucio Mercy meta, and which main supports who are really good at Overwatch, like we've spoke about before, and can play a lot. And then obviously what ended up happening was the teams like maybe like us and like Shock, who were able to find ways to put two flex supports in, had like really good advantages in those metas, right? And the teams that didn't either expect a Zen BAP meta or a Brig BAP meta and only had two supports and one main support, I definitely saw teams where I thought their main support playing either Brig or BAP was like a weak link, right? And then teams that didn't have that strength and depth got punished. And conceptually, the same could happen here. There's a few situations. If imagine your main tank has to play Hog or Zarya, but there is a meta where it's not locked and sometimes you have to swap onto Rhino or Winston, then one that's likely to mean is that your main tank has to play, right? There's no way to sub them out.
Right.
And what that's going to do is it's going to test every team's main tank's like mechanical or like ability to play over heroes, right? And I think objectively looking at it, there's going to be some teams that really, really struggle if they have a main tank playing Zarya or Hog. Like there's some main tanks in the league where there's no way they can play it at like a super high level. What then it also means is that if that isn't the situation, you can just play Zarya Hog an entire map and you don't have to worry about it at all. the teams play 2 off tanks if they have them, maybe. I think it's pretty easy to play a DPS player on Hog and not have problems. Obviously, Gladiators have already tested the waters by having a DPS player play Zarya throughout this season. So it's going to be which teams either have the best main tank who can adapt mechanically to off-tank heroes. Because I also saw stuff like Sigma Hog a little bit today when I was watching the Mayhem Contenders tournament. I don't put too much weight into what those teams are playing because I imagine they haven't had too much time on it. And I also think, generally speaking, that like Contenders teams are at least maybe able to like create new metas or to like properly theory craft like the way to play metas. I think sometimes they're, if I remember, Contenders teams are just way too happy just to copy and then just let's just play what everyone else is playing. You know? But it's definitely interesting. I think for us, we should probably be pretty happy about a 2 off tank meta. I feel like if we had to play Fury and Poco, I think there's probably no team who's going to match us on that tank line in the league. So I think that's going to definitely be good for us.
Who's playing Hawk?
Maybe that's a good question. Probably Fury, I think, would be what I would do, but I'm sure we'll test both ways. And I also think we'll have to give Sado a go on Hog or Zarya. Like I said before, I think it's super possible that especially if it's like required to do some swapping, then I think Sado's going to be like really, really good in this meta actually.
It's a bizarre world. It seems kind of weird too, because to your point, like it is kind of strange to kind of conceptualize this because a lot of the game kind of since 2019 has been about leveraging the fact that the game dictates you be at certain points, and it's not this kind of loose kind of scrimmy style, which is the vibe I get from this Ball, Hog, Zarya kind of trifecta. Any kind of thoughts on where the meta would go when Owl kind of does rotate towards this patch, where again I find it pretty difficult to believe that it's just going to be kind of scrimmy all over the place, no shields, your supports can get just absolutely blown up. I'm hearing double sniper as well, so it's like something's not lining up.
Like my theory was that dive was the strongest before the patch, and none of the dive heroes have been touched. So in my head, I think that good dive teams are going to have a lot of fun on this patch. I do think that, I don't know, to be fair, how many times have I said, you guys maybe don't know, how many times have I said they've done it, they've killed Brig, there's no way she's still back.
And then
she comes back. And how many times have I said that there's no way it's still double shield, you know, or they halved the shield. When those first Orisa came in, I remember being very vocal to like friends and stuff. There's no way you can play Orisa. 600 shield, what a joke. But I was incredibly wrong, so who knows? Yeah, I do think that Orisa is going to really struggle. I do think that the pull changes. I just think it makes it really hard to combo a lot of stuff with it because it's so fast. Like before, the pull was so reliant on like pull rocks and pull ults, and maybe I need to see it how it works, but I feel like it might be too difficult to get those combos off consistently when the pull goes like that, you know. So that was when I saw the patch. I thought, okay, we're going to go into a dive meta, but to be fair, playing a bit of Winston in ranked, maybe it's because I'm bad, but the Hogs proper one-shot you if you make even one misstep. So maybe I'm wrong again.
I mean, the Sigma kind of fits the bill when it comes to some of the DPS that have been running around. Again, just kind of Ashe, Widows, these double sniper kind of archetypes. It feels like you need at least some sort of protection with the Hog because the Hog does kind of give you another one-shot potential. Is there a world where like Orisa comes in and just kind of like baits for like pull Hog hooks to make that more consistent?
Yeah.
Rock, maybe Rock Hall or Rock chain hook, something like that, where you're trying to do these like 2 ability combos to roll these fights.
Yeah, possibly. I just can't. The image I can't shake in my head is how a Hog Zarya can walk through a choke against dive and not just be naded and killed if the Ana's out. You know, I just don't understand how like. How you don't, or like if there's a Widow and your team's walking through a choke against a Widow with Zarya Hog, like
have fun. But it seems like just a death by fire. Like you don't have any kind of protection. Like you said, nades, snipers, even just having a Zen, just free discords. Like there's no pressure. I just discord whoever I want and I just right click them. Like it doesn't seem like it's gonna work.
Yeah.
But, yeah, maybe like you said, maybe they're just too strong not to run, and there's like a weird style. Like it's so bizarre. It's kind of fun and interesting, but in the same way, in the same sense, like you kind of coming from a history of playing a main tank, is it like, does it feel weird kind of having such a big patch and maybe such a monumental shift in the way that this season has been played coming
Bro,
right at such an important time?
if I was still playing and I was in the league, I'd be benched so fast on this patch. Like the idea of
Yeah.
me trying to play aim hero in a competitive environment would be a genuine joke. Like my team would actually have to sign another player instantly. I'd be the first one out the door. And especially in contenders when we didn't have like subs or anything, this would be the worst patch. This would be a career ender for me actually. Good thing I got out at the right time.
So there's the like friend of the show Baroy on Twitter raised like a point. So we kind of have established that this is like, in terms of meta, this could be the Wild West, right? And there might be a way, like, of course, having more time on this patch therefore means that you're then more well prepared for the playoffs. And Baroy raised the point that some teams still very much have to care about the regular season matches that are being played on a different patch, and therefore cannot focus on the playoff patch. Do you think that's a problem from a competitive integrity point of view?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know which teams still should care about regular season, because the cutoff is like top 4 is the only one that's significant. Almost everybody else is still playing almost right away, unless I've got the format totally wrong, which is always possible.
It is significant that, like, there in NA specifically, there's a second cutoff. I could bring it up real quick, or Eric can. Top 5 is significant. Atlanta and LA teams can make top 5. So Atlanta and Gladiators and Valiant are still very much focused on the next week.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess ultimately when it comes to playoffs, is my belief is that if we're good at this meta, you could probably take away first seed and put us in 13th, and we'll probably still finish pretty similar. I think. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a little bit harder, but I do think that if we would imagine, I don't know, we got fined all of our wins for whatever reason, and then they made us come from 13th place, I think we'd still be fine. And I think that other teams would feel the same. Like, I think almost if you did random seeds in a double elimination bracket, then the final standings would probably look pretty similar. Because the truth is, if you're 9th seed or 5th seed, if you're just a top 4 team in this meta, you're gonna get through anyway. So I definitely think that it makes a lot of sense for these teams just to start scrimming live already. The other thing to think about is it's only a few days, and at the same time, the first few days of scrims on a patch are always almost a waste of time anyway. There's no one has it cracked down. For us, we're going to take a week, we're going to chill, and we're going to do what we did at the start of the Countdown Cup and just see what everyone else has decided, and then we'll see if we like it or if we need to make some adaptations.
Sure.
Well, the issue is, and I don't have the bracket up right now, but as I understand, Eric, the lowest seeds don't have that ability to make the second threshold. But I believe there's a cutoff where you actually don't enter the double elimination bracket at all.
So you have to play-ins, maybe.
Yeah, you have to do play-ins, which are single elimination, and then the 3 teams that do make it through are seeded into the double elimination side.
Yeah,
I think
then it does matter for sure. I am wrong. Yeah,
it also comes into like a product standpoint where it's like, okay, because of the format that you've chosen to run with like how the patches drop, it also kind of comes into question all of these makeup games where it's like, okay, if we know that it's probably been more beneficial for them to, or at least for some teams, to practice live, they're not necessarily practicing, or practicing PTR, not necessarily practicing live. For these games, these makeup games, it kind of draws into question like not the competitive integrity, but like, why do I bother watching these games when they're kind of already playing in advanced? It's one thing for like a couple teams to do it, but it seems like it's, again, more beneficial for a majority of teams, even the lower and the top seeded teams. It's these kind of middle pack
for sure
that have to kind of worry about both.
I'll actually just call up the statistics joker right now. Eric, can you fill us in on the breakups?
That's right. So yeah, I can speak to the Top 5 teams go directly to double elim and NA. 6th through 9th, that's down to just a Defiant and Fuel, and 6th, 8th, and 9th seed. They're going to play 1 round of single elim, and 10th through 13th have to play 2 rounds of single elim to get to the double elim bracket.
Well,
So
then
10th, 13th have to play 2 single elim matches to even qualify. Like, yeah, it's rough. Like, when we're talking about the season in general with hero pools and burnout and all this stuff, like, I do wonder, like, is that really what we want to do? Is force teams to practice to kind of like fight for a decent playoff chance, and then on top of that, like, drop a patch that could be eliminating main tanks from the entire game.
Well, Blizzard had a call about how the format wanted to do, and I was very strongly in favor of. I think it's a joke that these teams even can qualify. To be honest with you,
Fair,
the
sure.
fact that 30 teams are all still in playoffs and still have, like, they only have to win 2 to make it to top 8. In my opinion, is genuinely a joke. Like, I don't understand how a team can go 2-24 and still
and
have
still
a
have a chance.
Sure.
Surely the whole point of regular season
Sure.
is if you suck, you don't make playoffs, right? And obviously there's the corona stuff has obviously made things difficult, and I think, but to me, like, I think even 8 teams is too many in a situation like this, you know? Like, I'd be happy with, I mean, obviously because we finished first, I'd say only 1 team should make it, you know? I mean, like, it should be the Premier League. They should give us a trophy. But I don't understand why we have 6 months of games, and then in the end, as long as you're good on this random new meta, that it doesn't matter, right? Like, Boston could actually maybe be the best Zarya Hog team in the league. They go on this run, and they finish like 5th or 6th overall when they went 2-24, whatever their record is, you know. And like, that has to, like, to me, that's a total joke, personally.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and we have talked about that. Of course, there's always a giant caveat. It's also like the season draws heavily, so I suppose also just with the added financial strain, it's not like a bad situation for teams to just get more exposure and have more of an argument towards their sponsors and whatnot.
Again, I think I'm flipping my script a lot when it comes to this argument in particular, because I've been in defense of, like, okay, Corona's been weird, Hero Pools has been weird. We've been trying to figure out what this is supposed to be all season long. I think it's fair to have all these people in. I didn't expect this patch at the end of the season to eliminate a role that we've kind of like banked on for the entire season, teams have built for. So at this point, yeah, maybe it is probably beneficial to kind of eliminate and have some sort of cutoff so that you don't have a Boston, a Washington just make this crazy run. Decay's on Washington now. Like, I can't imagine that that's going to be the case where he just adds some sort of like crazy firepower and you put him on Hog and he goes crazy and wins Justice a seed to go to Korea. Like, as much as the community might like think that's a cool idea, that draws into question the entire season. It's like, what were we all doing? What were you guys doing getting first? Like, why was that even beneficial for you? If there's going to be a patch that drops, Hog gets put in over main tanks, and now Boston, like you said, is the best.
That's the problem. Like, apparently it doesn't, like, nobody really talks about this unless just like ish hits the fan.
Something,
and
actually
we have a terrible situation. Like, maybe like this is exactly the season where I'm like, just let Vancouver win it all. Like, that's it's like,
can you imagine?
There's already a
gigantic roster.
There's just already a gigantic caveat on the season, and maybe this will purge all this dumb stuff from the system where everyone's just like, okay, next year this is going to be ironclad. Like, just like, maybe we're running full Premier League format or whatever it is, but like,
hell yeah.
Like,
But just imagine, okay, you're like, say you're Gladiators, or I'm looking at the seeding, it's like Fuel and Defiant, right? So you're in a situation where you're like 9 or 8 wins, you're close to 50% win record, and you're going to finish 8th overall, right? Which is maybe where the cutoff would be normally. And all of a sudden, this massive patch hits, and you only have 2 tanks because, hey, there's no way they're going to eliminate main tank from the game, right? All of a sudden, this patch hits, and Washington, who've somehow been able to pick up Decay, which again, I don't think that makes any sense. And then Boston, imagine Boston are unbelievable at this meta, because imagine they had a second tank and that was just one random oversight and they had 2 tanks, and all of a sudden they have this Hog Legend comes in and does stuff for them. How sad would you feel if you finished like 6, 7 wins above a team you were better than them for the whole season? This patch hit happens, they're given this like charity lifeline at the bottom. They win a few games and you don't make top 8 and you finish the season below them. Like, to me, I wouldn't like that very much, you know?
Honestly,
I think
and
we almost had that last season with Washington. You know,
Yes.
if we were to be in like a similar kind of way, where something happened to kind of draw into question, who gets seated where, there's some excuses made. Maybe the bracket gets opened up a little bit more and Washington gets to play. Maybe there's a string of upsets where they go on with Rollock and be able to beat these teams who have kind of had to qualify through goats. As much as Blizzard tried to remove it and kind of kill it, it still kind of persisted. And then they get to kind of swoop in and kind of vulture it up and pick the scraps. Like it's rough.
That's the worst part, and it's like, this is not as an Overwatch specific problem, because like for instance in League of Legends they also famously do the Worlds patch, and it's trash. It's so bad. Like, why would you go through 2 splits? Like, I don't know, it's like, I think it's 6 months of active play or more in order to figure out who's good on a specific patch range that usually is pretty similar to each other, and the meta's still constant. And then Worlds runs around, and suddenly, like, you can't actually see, and this is not a historical argument, but like, you couldn't, if you had not been able to see Insec on Lee Sin or Mad Life on Thresh, because these were just left to the ground. Now, the Overwatch equivalent being, if I play Goats the entire season, do I really care like who has a nuts Doomfist in the playoffs, right? And that's always been like, the filter being different from the decider is an absolute trash feature of esports. And that's also the problem with playoff formats as a whole. If you actually want, like, the problem is, here's this current. The current is, we have viewers that cannot stand watching our games without novelty. Okay? We have to accept this. We're not going to change a million people's behavior based on that. Okay, so we gotta live with that, like, truth of nature, if you want. And then you have your system that you gotta build around it. Well, let's not work at all with the novelty aspect of it and like make it all like weird and like, but let's try to do 2 things at once, because that's kind of the sports system and it kind of works in other esports, even though that is not at all like applied to the games that we're playing. And it's just like, it's like this homunculus that's barely breathing at this point, where we're just like, well, I guess the London Spitfire were the best team in season 1.
Yeah.
It's, dude, like, and New York is just like, okay, I guess, dude, like, I don't know, like, I don't, it's not satisfying.
No, not in the slightest.
There's still, technically, it's obviously unlikely, but there's still, maybe it's like it requires 5 or 6 games to go in a certain way, but there is still a way in which Boston finishes ahead of us this season.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the big thing that actually, I mean, of course, regular season counts for something. Like, you guys do get like a stamp of approval of some sort, but it's not what everybody's playing for. Everybody's playing for the trophy. Everybody wants that ring.
All we have to do is lose our first 2 games, which, hey, stranger things have happened.
Sure.
Boston then need to win, 3 games maybe, or 4 games, and then Boston finished above us, and maybe Boston had a better season than us, you know?
Yep. That's what is remembered in the history books. Who does well in playoffs. Nobody really gives jack about, the regular consistent team in the regular season.
No. They really
Everybody wants to know who's the best hog and ball torturer, so.
Yeah.
That's I guess what we're getting until we figure this stuff out. But
yeah. What can you do? Like, it is a hard system to create, or a hard situation to create systems around, because you kind of want the game to
100%.
change, and you
Yep.
also kind of want to display a variety and ask a variety of teams. Like, maybe that flexibility should just be worked into the playoff format in some
Yeah.
way. I don't know how you would do
Maybe-
that. Probably like a more round
Why
robin
do
play.
playoffs? Why not just take what Chris has been talking about? And correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm attributing the wrong author here, but Chris for himself has talked about doing monthly hero pools. Combine that with the monthly tournament format. You have that novelty all season long, and then you test the best team on the patch that's been played in playoffs, and that's what's the final act of the series, or the story, right? Like, I don't know. I think you can have both, but this it has to slow down as the big games start to happen, as like what everybody's been practicing for and playing for all season long.
Yeah.
The filter needs to be decided by that point, so the fans can properly adjust and say, okay, this is where I think of these teams. This is what I should expect. Maybe we'll see some unexpected results due to, a nice break or some added practice. That's great. But I don't think anybody over the course of, a couple years really wants just March Madness every year. And it's consistent. Like, nobody wants just Boston winning a couple events, even though they've been trashed the entire season, or Justice. I don't mean to, bag on these teams in particular, but they're just using them as example because of how poorly they've done in the regular season. Like, you have to have some storylines. There has to be some sort of consistency. And I think there is a very, not a very obvious, but there is like a clear way to start building that for the future that I hope happens from this season. I don't know.
Here's for instance an idea, right? You make it monthly hero pools. You have 4 heroes that are being banned, and then you go into playoffs and you make it long. So you only limit the regular season to 5 months, and then at the end of it, you kind of keep those hero pools in mind. And then, for instance, let's say the grand finals. I'm not sure how that would work in the run up to that. Have it like the NBA finals, but every best of 5, so it would be a best of 5 or best of 5s, would be a different meta, a different hero pool that we have already played throughout these 5 finals. I'm not saying that's a great solution. I'm saying we are now applying the filtering methods that we had through the season in the final situation. Now, of course, it would be underwhelming if we clearly saw it. There isn't a meta that existed throughout those 5 months where that particular team wasn't absolutely dominant and there's no coming back after the first or 2 series. But like, that is at least a system that would take these relative performances throughout the season in mind. Now, how that would work with patches that also, of course, significantly changed the game is another question. But yeah, like, at the end of the day, you gotta come up with a playoff format that is sort of synchronized towards the nature of the regular season.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then this will always have like huge volatility in the outcomes that you could potentially see. Less than I initially predicted, because like teams like you guys and Shock actually are pretty consistent throughout many different metas. To a degree, I didn't foresee that happening. And I thought it's also maybe to a degree that the like the tier 1.5 teams maybe weren't as good as I thought they'd be. I like initially in the conception of the season, like I saw you guys, like even if someone told me, okay, we're doing NA and Asia teams, I'm like, okay, that's okay. Like Fusion is a super team, Shock is a super team, or whatever definition you want to choose there. And then Atlanta looks good. Gladiators kind of looks good. Like those 1.5 teams would have at least like been able to punch up significantly based on the meta that has been happening. And that this season, with the exception maybe of Paris and Fusion, Florida, hasn't happened with any consistency or pattern. So where the tier 1 teams are always still able to sort of punch past, other than the was it Summer Showdown that Paris won? So yeah, it's a It's a weird system, and I mean, we're not even sure if we're just hopefully entering the last week of hero pools. That would, for me, be the ideal solution. We don't know what next year will look like. But if you're going forward with that type of deal, then there gotta be some twist where the nature of the regular season play finds itself in the playoff format in some shape or form. Or, like, I wouldn't even mind just not having playoffs. And therefore having, like, maybe making these cups, or, like, maybe it's not playoffs, maybe it's a TI type of format. Or I don't know. Like, even that is pretty bad. Like, I don't know. It's really hard. You would probably have to sit down to come up with an elaborate thing, but it is about having the nature of the regular season maintained throughout the later stages of the tournament. Right. Anything else? Did we have any last oh yeah, there's one. Okay, we kind of had, like, you just drop in briefly on your walk last last time.
Yeah.
Have you? Okay, I'm not going to ask you to just. I mean, we can do the advertisements for your players after, as like sort of like a goodbye. But have you thought about, like, who your picks would be if you couldn't pick your? Because votes are coming up, I assume. I don't know if anyone will ask you, but who would you say?
Yeah, actually do. I don't know. MVP is a pretty tough one. Like I said, I think on my walk, I think Shock's candidates are who? It's Violet and Choi, right?
Mhm.
So I think they've both been pretty good. I mean, obviously they've both been really good. And then obviously the Shanghai guys have been insane too. I don't know. It's really hard to argue. I think it's a really tough one this season, actually.
Let me ask maybe a more interesting question. Would you have nominated XEI or XE if you had to pick a Paris player?
Maybe most people would say Hambin, right? I think that was your guys' argument on the show.
Yes.
You know what's interesting is I think that how in football whenever there's like the end of season awards, it's always like a striker or an attacker normally that gets it, and defenders and goalkeepers are always left out. It's interesting that this Overwatch League has like a similar concept, right? Where like DPS players normally get heavily favored, and there's like no main tanks and no main supports. But one thing I thought interesting is I think on good teams, if you're a Sigma player, I think you end up looking really good. Like, okay, Hambin has been really good. It's unquestionable. I think he's really good. But I also think that when you look at Florida, okay, Gaga is insane. Like, every single one of these teams, it's almost like their Sigma ends up looking really good. Like, and Void too, right? A lot of off tanks, and I think almost all of them got in based off like how good their Sigma's been, maybe with the exception of Void.
I think it has something to do with the frequency they show up in the kill feed. That's my theory.
I think
that's why flex support's there.
Was there? Yeah, exactly.
Was.
And what's interesting is that when it comes to like praise and criticism, certain roles, it's like so obviously unfair. Like main tank. If every single team that's doing bad, I always see threads about how their main tank's the problem is just feeding, and I always think back to Shadow threads last year, and we had it every single time,
Yep.
And then it's main tank's such a horrible role to play. When you're good, no one ever compliments you and says you're MVP level. But when you're bad, everybody notices it. And I guess like maybe off tank this season has been the opposite way, where if you're like good, it's easy to look good, and if you're bad, it's not easy to be like obviously exploited. So there's definitely something about the way the game is which makes it very difficult to see who's like true MVPs, and certain roles end up getting like favored more than others. It's just like something interesting that I noticed. I mean, it also depends if it's a problem. Like a lot of people are saying, oh, you have to have main supports and main tanks in there, but it's possible that's not the case. I would have loved to see Sado get in there for sure, because I think that he's even now he doesn't get the credit he deserves. I think really. I think against Shock he was insane. Like he was like really insane. So.
I think we both had him as World Star, right, Joe?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's hard not to. I think he's had a truly impressive season. If there was ever going to be a rule in terms of like representation when it comes to like MVP voting, I think it would be good to at least have some representation across all roles rather than like specific teams.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, if there is going to be like a star main tank, they should be on the ballot. Like
Yeah.
you need to give them some sort of recognition, even if it is just a resume point of nominee. Like that means something to not only the person, but like to future teams, future scouts,
I agree. Yeah.
employers maybe. I think that would be where, if we were going to draw a line, that's where I would want it. Yeah, I think
Coach of
Sato
the
probably should
season
be.
is more interesting than MVP. I think that's like
Yeah,
it's an interesting one.
Yiska seems to think that it should be the coaching staff because it's very
Yeah.
difficult to tell that from a media, maybe even like a talent standpoint of like what really the coaches are doing inside the dugouts. Is that where do you kind of stand on that?
I mean, it makes sense, but I'm sure if KDG wins it, he's gonna like dedicate it to the coaching staff.
Sure.
Like he's just the face for it. Like and obviously like in most situations, ours included, the head coach does do the most. Like if we had a coach of the year award, it's gonna go to KDG. But yeah, like coaching staff, yeah, on paper it's more fair. I agree. But I'm also not sure how many assistant coaches are going to be like mad that their head coach won it and it doesn't give them the credit for it. It's nice just to have a name for it.
Yeah.
And also, yeah.
Do you have any sense of who is doing what in other teams? Even you on the inside?
If I'm friends with them, yeah.
Okay.
If I'm not friends with them, almost certainly not.
So you, for instance, if I ask you who does what in Shanghai, you wouldn't have any idea.
Zero clue. Zero clue.
So how is someone supposed to make a nomination based on like the coach, right? It's always going to be the head coach, and it's going to be like basically symbolic for the coaching staff.
Yes.
It might as well just be. I agree.
Yeah.
Like you've made some strong points. Is there any like awards that you wish kind of were introduced or maybe tweaked or changed? Any kind of opinions there?
Did they do most improved? Did the league do that properly, or
No?
That's just like something. No. But maybe that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of the most improved players are tanks, because they're always the ones that got shit on last year, and now everyone's like, oh, look,
And now they're actually doing good.
Yeah, because all of a sudden their team's playing better.
Yeah.
Most improved. Apart from that, I think that like role stars, MVP, rookie, coach. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Did you feel like at parts in the season, I'm not sure if that's still the case, it felt like people used the rookie award to make it easier to discuss the MVP. So it's like, okay,
if you're
now
a rookie, you go into that category.
Yes, exactly. It's like, okay, now we don't have to consider Carpe and we don't have to consider Void and Fleta because they are not part of that. So we can like the burden, like we just cut everything in half, and now we can like sort of without pen and paper come up with a solution who the rookie of the year should be. Now it's interesting. Like I don't think we have any information on this, like
on the ballot.
Yeah.
I don't think that's been put out yet. I can assume there is going to be a few names, probably one in particular coming from the Fusion, but nothing public yet.
Yeah. I mean, in my mind, like for instance, if Alarm is MVP of the season, he's automatically Rookie of the season. There's no logical way where that doesn't happen.
Unless there's some sort of, rule that bars them from being both, which I would hate, but again, I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah. And I think to a degree then, like, if we agree that we have all these biases in place with, like, opacity of performance on certain roles, then I think Role Stars is actually really one to look forward to. It has sort of like a cool, like also symbolism in the game with the the badges. That's amazing. I would love if they even went further. Like maybe when you release a new map, there's like a trophy case, and like each player of the Role Stars has a trophy representing them, or something like this.
More tie-ins would be cool.
But like to that degree, like for instance, okay, let's ask this: who would be your main support role star if you couldn't pick your player? And
that's a good question.
Sometimes it's hard to come up with names, so the obvious picks would be like FD God, DJ Gone. See, I already struggle.
Yeah. But it's also interesting that like main support is like
Funny Astro. But, oh
no,
yeah,
it's been
it did.
it's been benched a little bit this season as well. You know,
Mhm.
like a lot of the good teams didn't even play a main support. So
Yeah.
like, is there any reason like, obviously no one's gonna vote, but is there a reason Boombox can't be like
Sure.
main support of the season, or like maybe even Alarm because he was the one that played the Brig, which was the main support.
Mm.
I think
Yeah.
the best main support this season has been Alarm when he played it. You know, yeah.
Fair.
So maybe it's fine to have like 2 tanks and 2 supports and 2 DPS. Like maybe you don't have to, especially when there's so
Okay.
much variety back
Sure.
and forth. That like you're
Mm.
okay to give two
Sure.
supports. I think that's probably fair.
The problem then being that it would just go to flex supports mostly, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
probably,
sadly
yeah.
the way this cookie crumbles. But yeah, okay. I think like the one overarching question that I had in the waiting of all the awards we did, Joe,
Mm.
is okay. In my mind, it's like this has been a season where you had to be so flexible in order to always play, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that weights highly. Like Sado played 100% of your matches.
That's important.
Like Void played 95% of the matches. Same for Lee J Gone. Do you think that's like a really, really significant weight onto the consideration of who should be rookie? Or is it therefore, like for instance, this is my problem with the XZ nomination, where it's like I don't think he even qualifies for rookie of the season based on his play
Yeah.
rate.
Yeah. It's tough.
But he's now an MVP candidate, right?
Right.
Playtime isn't as important, but I think like the variety of heroes they've played should be weighted like extremely highly, right?
Mm.
Like obviously, like we said about the Sigmas, like you could have 100% play rate as an off tank, and you've probably only played like, especially if you're like part of the Asia region where they were playing double shield while we were still playing rank comps, you could have
Mm.
absolutely had like a 90% play rate in Sigma this entire season very easily. The only weeks he didn't play it is when he was banned.
Mhm.
So like, why if your hero has been meta the whole year, like does that count for more than someone whose hero was only meta for 50% of the year? You know, and that's why I think someone like Carpe should, and Alarm, both of them for sure should like get a lot of credit. You know, like think about the heroes Alarm's played this season. He's played BAP extremely well, Brig, Ana, and Zen, and or every single one of them he's been world class, right? Carpe the same, like on every single hero he's played this season. He started in McCree. He's obviously played a lot of Widow. Then he's went on to Ash. So he's across the season. He's had to play like a lot of different heroes and looked good on all of them. That's why Sada's the best main tank in my opinion, because he's the only main tank in the league who has actually played Orisa, Winston, and Ryan and been elite on all 3 across the season. Like obviously Fearless and Smurf have been really good when they've played, but they've never had to cover the full spectrum like Sado did.
Yep. They've been some.
And I think that to me, like if you're a player and you've shown to be elite on not just your hero, but then other heroes across every single meta where you've been irreplaceable by your team, that counts a lot for me. Which then adds some sort of bias to the rules where there wasn't flexibility across the season,
Sure.
like off tank, you know. So it's never going to be perfect. But to me, that's like a really significant factor. If you're always going to play no matter the meta, that obviously indicates like you're very valuable, you know. Which I think the MVP, somewhere it's in the name, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just looked it up. So for instance, someone like Void had like 21 hours of playtime, half of which was Sigma. Diva comes in at 6 hours. Zarya comes in at 4 hours. So
yeah, so that's enough of a spectrum for me to say that he absolutely deserves like MVP nomination and should be up there.
Absolutely, yeah. And then I mean Shanghai, from if memory serves right, always had like, I don't think they are the archetypical pick team. Rather than which team was it? I think it might have been Guangzhou that just stuck to had more meta adherence week to week. Than
Yeah,
it felt like
absolutely.
Right.
Shanghai
100%.
definitely like plays similarly to us in Shock, where they play the matchup rather than just like play a comp, and they're happy to adapt and change depending on what's working or what's not working. I think that's been one of the absolute like best things to see about this season. And then that's something that I think you guys, when you like make coaching decisions, you should weight heavily, is how many coaches actually for the first time in the league actually made like game management decisions, like stuff like what KDG did against Gladiators, where he just decided to like sub people out and put in others and play like a comp which we'd never scrimmed before because he realized it wasn't working, and then on the fly had to come up with like a basic system of how to play the comp and how we should communicate and how we should play. To me, that's an unbelievable thing for a coach.
I didn't even think that was a possibility.
Yeah.
For the vast majority of seasons, and other coaches also told me that it isn't.
Yeah, it's possible, especially in GOATs. Maybe that's what's been good about this season. But I also think 90% of the coaches in the league couldn't do what he did there, and they would just keep playing the comp and they would just lose 0-3. And I think that like you should understand that when we played against Shock in that final, they were in a similar boat where they had almost not scrimmed that comp at all. But Krusty understood the game and realized that they couldn't win against our dive comp on other comps, so he thought their best chance was to play this comp. And then both coaches were just making adaptations as the series went on, and then like it ended how it ended. And I think that's something that like I definitely see it with Shanghai. I remember the first reverse sweep they did was there was a very noticeable change that like there was no way that Shanghai was defending with dive on Junkertown and Scrims. I think that's like, literally impossible. But they realized how the series was going against Seoul and they changed it. And then that's an insane like coaching decision to make that maybe Seoul didn't make, you know? And then you can see like the teams that have like the not they don't have that same like level of game management to where like against us Gladiators, you know, like all of a sudden their comps just went crazy, you know, like sometimes they decided to mirror because they didn't know what they were doing. So like they tried all sorts because they were just like they couldn't figure out what to do. And I think that's to me that's what's extremely valuable about like the elite teams coaches is their ability to adapt mid-series and get wins.
Okay, I'm mindful of the time, so in order to give a little bit of time towards the campaign of your players for the MVP vote, and also wink wink, we have a dedicated viewer base that not only will be degenerative enough to hardcore vote for your respective like candidates. We also have some programmers, and apparently that's very effective in voting in the Overwatch League. So
bots are my favorite people.
Wink wink to the other coaches. Like if you want to advertise on this space, like be our guest, slide in the DMs, and we can make that happen for next week. But why? Let's start with Alarm. Why should Alarm be the people's MVP pick this season?
Well, I think Alarm is like probably been the player that has been able of any flex support in the league has placed the most heroes to a high level. Of that, I'm confident this year because I think no other flex support played Break, Ana, Zen, and Bap, and he looks elite on all of them. I said it. We did a little hype video on our YouTube channel, which you go check out. But I've said it before that I think Alarm is the most talented player I've ever seen play the game, on a truly like natural level. Like I think he understands it in a way that it's so easy for him. To me, he's like the Messi of Overwatch. If you wanted to make a comparison, which is obviously maybe too high praise for where he is at his career, but I think that obviously his attitude and stuff is really, really good. But like I said in the interview I did with you, Joe, that he's someone who could have got exactly where he is now by being a really bad teammate because he's that talented. And the fact that he's a nice guy and he works really hard is pretty impressive. Yeah, I think that he's the best flex support in the world. I think he's definitely, like I said, the most talented player I've ever worked with. I think he's a good vote.
Okay, and then the floor is yours to make the case for Carpe.
Well, it's not like Carpe lacks talent, but I think that I go the other direction with him. I think for him, he's someone whose attitude and like drive is put him in the position that he is in terms of like ahead of the pack. I think he's maybe closer to Ronaldo, if I can make that praise too, where he's always he puts in like a ridiculous amount of hours. I've never really seen people who like I've never met anyone who hates losing as much as Carpe, and I've never met someone who wants to win as much as Carpe, which I think is a pretty important things to have in a professional player. I mean, he's hero pool for a hit scan is extremely wide compared to most. I think that like he's not like a true. He's more flexible than that. I think he can play a lot of heroes. What I always say about DPS players is that the like maybe each role in Overwatch has has a job in how they win you matches. And the DPS's role is to find a way to win you fights which shouldn't be won based on like the positioning of the ults. I think there's no player in the league who wins us fights we shouldn't win more than Carpe. There's been almost every series, there's one map where you look at it and you say, well, Carpe won us that map just alone. Like, there's millions of examples, and there's millions of times where it's a close match and Carpe is the one that makes a difference in that fight. And I think if you understand Overwatch and how many times that Carpe is able to make exceptional plays on a regular basis, then I think he's also like a pretty easy vote for anyone.
Sweet. I mean, we agree. I think I had Carpe as Roll Star and Alarm as MVP choice. Yeah, it's like I was fortunate enough to meet Alarm at the Atlantic Showdown in Krefeld, and there's the way he carries himself, and I don't even like I of course don't speak a word of his language, but just like that left a lasting impression on me, what kind of a professional he is. And I was just like, okay, this kid is just going to explode. Like I just wrote an article this week about Scheinriesen, which is a German word for basically like a thought experiment of someone that is gigantic in the distance, but the further they or the closer they come, the smaller they become. And the analogy being like, for instance, someone like a Who Are You looked ginormous in Apex Season 2, but then arrived and now looks very mortal. I like after just seeing how Alarm works at the Atlantic Showdown, I was convinced that was not going to happen to him. Just like a way to behave towards his teammates, the way he, like, even though, okay, this is going to be super pseudo, but like the way he takes care of his gear, like it's like an instrument, right? Then just like how he talked to the coaches there or communicated with them, with fellow teammates, that was just an inside way I knew, okay, this is going to just like explode in the Overwatch League as well. Like they're not going to miss a beat. And of course, at the time, we already knew what he was capable of from Fusion Uni, just like a disgustingly clutch player, like keeping that win record almost single-handedly in some of those matches. And then,
yeah, seriously,
like unreal clutch potential. And then, yeah, I'm happy that this manifested also this, even though I really didn't have any doubts towards that. So, yeah,
I said it in the hype video, but I do think by the time the league and the game is dead, that Alarm will have been the best player that's ever played it.
Yep.
Yeah, and
I think he's up there.
I hope that the support role holds up and remains like at least the flex support role. And once again, we talked about the fluidity of that roles, but I hope it remains very apparent to people when people are doing well. In Season 1, of course, that was the case. Like if we're having a Mercy Lucio meta, maybe the Lucio can set themselves apart. Even though I will say, like, some of the Mercy players are also, but you get the idea, right? Like if you don't show up in the kill feed, then it's not going to be a memorable experience that just like stacks upon itself. And I really hope that the game Overwatch lends itself to just be something where Alarm has all the opportunity to go for the GOAT trophy. The discussion is pretty wide open still in Overwatch. And of course, we're also a very young scene, but it's also great that Alarm has a pre-Overwatch history. Pre-Overwatch League history, I mean. So, yeah, like maybe in like 3 years' time, we're going to crack open this time capsule, look at what you said about Alarm now, and then remember that moment fondly, if that potential actualized. And yeah, I think we're about time Shoutouts, Chris. Anything you want your fans to know for like the playoffs coming up, the expectations, anything you're looking forward to? The floor is yours.
No, just the same as always. Thank you for supporting us so far. Hopefully, hopefully you've enjoyed the season as a whole, and we're gonna keep working hard. Like, you don't have to worry about that. And then I think I said last time I was here that hopefully we'll win the next tournament, which we didn't, but hopefully we'll get the win when it really counts. You know.
Yep. Very good. Joe, what do you have coming up this week?
Coming out soon-ish, hopefully, on GG Recon, I get to be paid for complaining about the Valorant tournament structure and why that needs to be mandated at some point and has some sort of structure if we're going to ever see this game kind of take off into major international lands and whatnot in the future. Obviously, COVID, gracing us with that. And then today, we're gonna look at C9's Valorant roster and take a look at Tens and how cracked this boy really is. So yeah, stay tuned.
Sweet. Yeah, for me it's like more like a of the day business. I'm working on like a bigger feature that's coming out on a player. That has been a long time coming. I think I need one more interview, and I hope I can go high effort on that piece when it eventually comes. It's an Overwatch player. So that's something I'm working on, but nothing really I can talk about right now. Now, of course, the nature of this Scuff podcast is that nobody like kept track of subs or like the usual shebang that we do. So, do you just want to thank the Patreons and then we get out of here?
Sure. Let me just pull that up right quick. But for those of you who did sub and donate that we may have missed, thank you very, very much. You're not ignored. You are very much appreciated and loved. So Hoagies, I believe, jumped in with a sub. So thank you very much. And thank you to our patron producers. Battlecrab Pin, Lolshin Charlie, Audio Compass, Porkchop Sammy, Kasha67, Kujiko Chara, Nathan Your Misery, Hunter Tane, Refined Bean, Rexane, Roger B, Fable Steven, Owen, Chris R34444, Yiska is holding me hostage. Please send help. I'm under Yiska's desk. Please send help. Yiska says, fish. And the additional sub or patron that we did not get their name. Thank you to all of you who support the show.
Thank you very much. With that, we are out. I think this time we can save it. I've been recording the episode the entire time, so I didn't want to lose the wisdom that ChrisTFer is so kindly sharing with us. So this should be working. Otherwise, we can just export, hopefully, onto YouTube. Otherwise, if everything goes badly, then thank you for the 90 live viewers that we had today. You will be kept in on the secrets that you've learned so far. Otherwise, we're out. And as John always says, bye.